this morning. I want to share with you a young lady who has had a few years in this industry and has had some success of her own. Suzanne Warfield is the president and CEO of Paramedical Consultants, Inc., a consulting, publishing, and association management firm. She's a New York State licensed esthetician. She's NCEA certified. She holds both Cedesco and ITEC diplomas, and she's worked for more than 13 years for a dermatology practice. She authored 450 articles, many of which were in Dermoscope magazine and Les Nouvelles. She's written 15 books for the consumer, medical, and skincare sectors. Ms. Warfield has served on the Academy of Dermatology's AAD Allied Health Committee, and she currently serves as the Executive Director of the Society of Dermatology Skincare Specialists and the National Coalition of Estheticians, the Manufacturers and Distributors Association's NCEA. I'm guessing this can go on, but we do have to get to her lecture, so I'll transition over. Suzanne wants to join us today and reflect on her career as an esthetician, as being an esthetician is not just another job. And as I said to you before in my own life, it's not the only thing that you can serve this industry as you come into it. Hers has been a rewarding lifelong journey. She mentions that each of us has an opportunity in life to leave our imprint on the world and to impact our industry. And as you reflect on your life and career, have you given any thought to how you will be remembered? Just like the many industry leaders who have trailblazed new horizons, we too can embrace a pioneering spirit and start creating our own legacy. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome to the stage this morning Ms. Suzanne Warfield.
Good morning, everyone. How are you this morning? So I have the pleasure of talking to you this morning about what my career has all been about. I started out as an esthetician when I was 20-something years old. I forget the date exactly because it's been 32 years. But when they told me that I had won the Crystal Award, I was very excited, and they wanted me to talk about what a legacy was. And I was like, legacy. I looked it up on the internet, and I went to legacy.com, and I realized that a legacy is when a person is dead. I think I'm still alive. So then I thought, well, let me look, because there's free dictionaries, and then there's other dictionaries. Isn't the internet wonderful? I don't know what we did without it before. But I found out that a legacy is something that is left by someone from the past for those in the future. And I thought, okay, there's definitely things that I've done in my career that have and will live on in the future. But then I also noticed that it said a legacy is going to be where I leave $1 million or bequeath it to someone. So let's just get one thing straight. I will not be leaving any of you $1 million. So now that we're clear on that. So I grew up on a farm in St. Catharines, Ontario. As you can see, we were a bit behind the times. We did have running water, but I had to go outside the house to find a little Johnny on the spot. Just kidding. We didn't have to do that. But growing up on a farm was great. Of course, I grew up with two brothers. Anyone have brothers? Yeah, brothers, and you can see they were Boy Scouts, and even though this is a picture of them when they were young, they were quite good looking. So girls would hang around me to get to my brother. Thank you. My mother entered me in beauty pageants because she thought that maybe I was just being a little too much of a tomboy and that I should probably learn how to do some of the girly girl things. And as you look at me now, I think she did a pretty good job. My interest in skincare started at a very young age. And you can see I'm holding the mirror in the right place. So growing up on the farm and all the boy things to do and out playing in the dirt, I still found time to get into my mother's powders, which she was not too happy about because back in those days, they had the big containers like this with the big powder puffs, which were quite expensive. And for a farmer's wife to buy that powder, when she came home and found me with that, she was not too happy. I graduated from the Lamb School of Esthetics in December of 1981. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and the Lamb School is Pat Lamb in the audience today. I'll have to make sure she knows that I mentioned when I went to school. My first day, that's actually kindergarten. But my first day working as an esthetician was in the back of a hair salon. How many of you have worked in the back of a hair salon? Doesn't it just drive you insane? Hair gets everywhere. It got to a point where I had to get a lock and key to close the door that I was using as my treatment room, but somehow the hair got underneath the door. It drove me insane. It was in 1984, that Sheridan College, which was a 2-year degree aesthetic program, they were looking for teachers to teach the second year of the program. And I always had enjoyed teaching because as a young child, I was always trying to, tell people something, so you can see that's lived on. But I got this job teaching the second year of the 2-year degree program, and I loved it. Being in the faculty of health and giving a 2-year degree program was the greatest job that I had, and I loved it. And then I fell in love. It happens to the best of us. And I ended up moving from Canada to the United States, and my husband was living in Cleveland, Ohio. Is there anyone here from Cleveland? All right, well, so I was in Cleveland, Ohio, but guess what? There was no aesthetic license. And they told me that if I wanted to be an esthetician, I had to go back to school and learn how to cut hair. And I'm like, I can't even cut a straight line, so that wasn't going to happen. So then my husband, he said, well, let me get another job. He was ready kind of for a change as well. So we moved to Boston, Massachusetts. Well, anyone here from Massachusetts? Over there. So how many hours of training is it for an esthetician in Massachusetts? 300. So I went to go teach in a school. I couldn't do it. I mean, I went from a 2-year degree program to 300, and I just couldn't do it. So I ended up going to work in a law firm. And for those of you who have known my career, you know that I do talk a lot of legalese. So I actually worked in a law firm as a receptionist. But one of the attorneys there discovered that I had a lot more going for me than just answering the phones, because I was going to school to finish my MBA. And it ended up that I started summarizing depositions. Now, why am I telling you that? Because it's how it led into another part of my career. I would take 32-page depositions and summarize them into concise 2-3-page documents. So then what happened? We then moved to New York, the Big Apple. I was like, wow, I'm a farm girl from Canada. I was so intimidated because it was New York. What do I know? I mean, all I'd seen was stuff on TV, and so it was quite intimidating. So moving to New York, I discovered there was no esthetician license either. What was I going to do? So I did what any person did. I temped, which was actually a good thing, because when I was temping, I mean, I couldn't apply for, real high-level jobs because, I knew skin. Well, I started to learn more about computers. For those of you of my age, you know that that's about when computers were coming in. I know that sounds really weird to say that, doesn't it? Before we had the internet, before we had computers. So I ended up learning a lot of computer skills and working with Microsoft Word, because I had never heard of any of that, and it was, computers came out long after I was in school. So the great thing was that I took that skill and used it later on in life as well. So I ended up one day going through the New York Times. That's when you used to have to look in the newspaper for jobs. The classified section in the New York Times was like this thick. I'm sure you remember newspapers, right? How many people read their newspapers on their tablet now or computer? Or even on their smartphone? I get clippings sent to me every day of world events and state events and city events. But one day in the New York Times, I saw an ad. And they were advertising for a facialist. I'm I'm like, a facialist? What's a facialist? So out of sheer curiosity, I called up the ad and I said, hi, I'm calling about the ad you have in the New York Times, and you're advertising a facialist. What is that? And the person on the other end of the phone said, oh, well, that's, someone who does facials. And I said, oh, you mean an esthetician? The voice on the other end of the phone said, what's that? Now, it turns out that this was an Upper East Side dermatologist. I didn't know what that meant in the grand scheme of things. But I went in and I had the job interview. And they had a nice woman who was working there, and she was trained as a cosmetologist. I now know that she had 70 hours of skincare training. So, of course, when I walk in with having a full year of training, and I taught the second year of a 2-year degree aesthetic program, they were like, when can you start? So I ended up working there, and because I wasn't able to work for so many years in my field, I was like a sponge. I was absorbing every little detail. And of course, because I was so eager and so glad to finally be working again, I also learned everything I possibly could. I asked the doctor one day, can I go into your office and look at some of your medical journals? And he's like, sure, you can go in, just make sure you put them back in order. I worked for a very anal dermatologist, but he was great. So he let me look at his journals. Well then, as I started to get out into the industry, and I thought, I need to do something with this. Let me put it in my head for later. Well, this is what I did with it. The Pci Journal, known as the Green Journal, is there anyone old enough in this room? Do you remember the journal? All right. What the Pci Journal was, it was a collection of scientific articles that had been published in medical journals, and what we did is we took a synopsis, and that's what we published. So let's think back for a minute. When I was in Boston and I worked for that law firm, I developed the skills to condense things. I then put that skill to work in our industry and produced the Pci Journal. We also put out something called the yearbook. Anybody here get a yearbook back in the day? So the yearbook was a culmination of all the scientific abstracts that we published for that year, but then we indexed them by subject matter. It was a great tool if you were writing a speech for yourself, or if you were a teacher, you could look up to see what the latest citations were and published works. It was like having your own little index medicus. So this is when I had started my company, Paramedical Consultants, in 1991. So you'll also notice that I was still continuing to work at the dermatology practice, and I had also started publishing the journal. I think at that point I was down to working 4 days a week and was taking that 5th day to start my own little adventure. Today, the Pci Journal is no longer in print. What we did is we combined it, and it is now a weekly, Warfield Weekly Update. We had a consultant come in and they said, well, you need to brand it with your own name. And I'm like, okay. So that's what we ended up doing. It is also now the official newsletter for the Society of Dermatology. In 1996 is when I really got the bug to write. Stephen Bosniak, may he rest in peace, he was a great ophthalmic surgeon. He had asked me to lecture at one of his eyelid symposiums in New York City, and I did, and then when he got the opportunity to write the book, he invited me to write a chapter on aesthetics, which I did. Well, it was during this time that I was approached by the acquisitions editor at Milady Publishing to write a book, The Esthetician's Guide to Working with Physicians. Anybody have it? It's been around. The Blue Book, I actually have to tell you a funny story about that, because about 2 weeks ago, I had my nephew in town, and we were talking about it, and you know how kids they were sharing their music, and I said, Napster was stealing music. I said, the same thing with electronic copies of ebooks. You're to download it to your Nook or your iPad, and that's where it's to stay. And the technology wasn't quite there yet, so I was explaining to my nephew that, taking music from somewhere else was like stealing it in a copyright infringement. So they didn't quite understand that. Now, the next book that I wrote was the Osha Manual on Bloodborne Pathogens. Back in 1994, when the Occupational Safety and Health Act came into effect, the Bloodborne Pathogen Act was the act that I was lecturing on, and actually Will Strunk was the MC of the program, and that's when the World Aesthetic Expo, we were at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. Beautiful chandeliers hanging. Lydia Sarfati introduced me, and I came out very serious, and I was a little nervous because it was the first time lecturing here in the United States, and I gave my presentation on OSHA, and then it was the Q&A time. And a nice woman came up to the microphone, and she said, "Miss Warfield, if I wear gloves to do a facial treatment, my clients say it won't feel the same." I thought a moment. And in developing my true lecture style, I said, "That's the same excuse men give when they don't want to wear a condom." I looked at Will. He doesn't remember turning white, but my greatest accomplishment, I believe, was Joel Gerson. Joel Gerson we have so much to thank him for in this industry, because without Joel Gerson writing the standard textbook, do you realize we wouldn't have licenses? We would not be able to have state licenses and have legally defensible tests. It was in 1999 that I cornered, or actually 1998 probably, is when I cornered Joel. Seriously, I did. And for those of you who know my personality, you know I cornered him in an elevator. And I said, "Mr. Gerson, you need to update this textbook. There's nothing in it on medical aesthetics, and your sterilization and disinfection is out of date." And he's like backing into the corner of the elevator. And today we are great friends. Contributing those two chapters to this edition of the Milady textbook opened the way for other authors to then go into the textbook and update information as you see it today. Some additional books that I've written, and I'll go through these quick because these are all kind of compilations. The middle book you may recognize, that is the Pivot Point esthetician book that's used in the Pivot Point schools across the country. Then came the medical aesthetic phase. This was a phase in our industry where everybody was jumping on the bandwagon. I remember being at some of the medical conferences, and the doctors are like, "Oh, I'm going to open up a medical spa." And I would just look at them and go, "You don't know what you're in for." Because they didn't know, first of all, about we estheticians. We're kind of an opinionated bunch. We like our product lines. We're going to be the ones picking the product line, not you, doc. So, Guide to Building a Medical Aesthetic Practice, I wrote to kind of just ease the doctor into our industry. It wasn't until much later that I then went into a medical practice in New York and discovered a laser with the key in it. I'm like, wow, that is like a $7,000 violation through ANSI if an inspector came in and saw that. So I wrote a laser safety book. And then The Legal Liability Issues of a Medical Spa is a book that I wrote because of the very reason there are so many legal and liability issues surrounding working in a spa. PCI Publishing then went on to publish other books for other authors as well. Guide to Product Selection, some of you may know Sarah Burns-Eggenberger. She was just on the Today Show last week. She is now the news product editor. Then I had two consumer contributions, TikTok, Stop the Clock, and my personal favorite, Sex, Lies, and Cosmetic Surgery. Of course, the next one I'm working on are the 50 Shades of an Esthetician. Through the years, I've had the opportunity and been invited to serve on boards, and I have to get close to the prompter because I can't read that. The National Interstate Council of State Boards of Cosmetology. They are the national organization that oversee all of our state boards in this industry. The American Academy of Dermatology. This was a very interesting appointment because that changed the direction of my career, because that is when I got involved with association management. I served for 2 years on the American Board of Cosmetology Schools and on the Risk Management Committee for iSpa. So through my involvement with the American Academy of Dermatology, I then founded the NCEA. In 2003, one of the great accomplishments and legacies that NCEA will have live on is the Esthetician Scholarship Program. To date, they have given over $20,000 in esthetician scholarships. It was in 2007 that the NCEA launched the national certification based on the 1,200-hour job task analysis. This certification is now recognized in law in 2 states, because only 2 states have passed legislation since this was born. But then we have 5 other states that have attained 1,200 hours or higher for esthetician training. Something else that is a legacy living on, and it lived on here at this meeting entirely, is the National Aesthetic Teacher Training Conference. And with the National Aesthetic Teacher Training Conference, we have now partnered with the International Congress to offer it 4 times a year. How many of the states that you are licensed in require CEs for licensure? What state are you? Virginia? Washington and Ohio. Okay? We have 11 states only that require CEs for relicensure. That's not a good thing. If we want to be recognized as a profession, we need to have ongoing continuing education. The #1 reason why state boards weren't doing continuing education was because of the fact that they didn't have the wherewithal to do continuing education. So once again, the NCEA started the Commission on Accreditation. And this is all part of where my career has taken me, from medical publisher writing books to association management. With the NCEA, they have their newsletter. They also started the first ever Teacher Award, another legacy that I hope will live on for many, many years. The other association that is a big part of my life and who I am is the Society of Dermatology Skincare Specialists, because that association is near and dear to my heart because I worked for 13 and a half years in a dermatology practice. But just so you know, I'm not all about work. This past summer, I had a blast. I ended up teaching and volunteering my time at a summer camp teaching kids scuba. 10 years old, I had just the greatest time. I also teach on a regular basis. I'm still teaching. Every Thursday morning, I go up to Ramapo College, which is about 20 minutes from my house, and I teach scuba diving to college kids. Can you believe they get 2 credits to learn how to scuba dive? And I have a blast. I also developed with our community through the fire department. We help their firefighters do dive certifications and move them on up through the ranks in order to become official safety rescue divers, because that is a big part. Okay, now you ready? The next one's going to be a shocker. I own a Harley. And I like leather. I think I posted for the first time ever on Facebook that I had a Harley, and people were like in shock. So, a legacy is not what's left tomorrow when you're gone. It's what you give, create, impact, and contribute while you're here, that it just happens to live on into the future. There are 3 individuals that we lost in our industry this year. I knew 2 of them personally. They contributed a variety of things to our industry, and they will be sorely missed, and I'd like to take a moment in their memoriam. Thank you. This industry has given so much to me. It's shaped me into who I am today. and who I am still to come. You all have an incredible opportunity to leave a legacy of your own. And as you go through the various stages of your career, the future is yours for the making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was wonderful. Good morning. My name is Denise Fuller. I'm the editor of L&E and Spa Magazine. And it is with great pleasure that today I am able to not only give my friend and a colleague the Crystal Award. The Crystal Award is the highest honor that you can receive in our industry. Today, Suzanne Warfield joins the ranks of icons such as Carol Walderman, Christine Valmet, Dr. Howard Murad, Dr. Pat and Dr. Hubert Lamb. And last year's Crystal Award was Dr. Puglisi. So today you are an icon, you are well respected, and congratulations.